battles of Baghdad back to our...
Welcome to Peace Now. My name is Trudy Quaife. I'm a member of Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. We're a local organization of friends and neighbors, and we've been advocating for peace, justice, and a healthy planet for over a decade. I'm your host today, and I'm joined by Michael Rice.
Hi.
Thanks for being here, Michael.
Glad to be here.
I'm just going to give you a little background first. Michael is a lifelong activist and an advocate for peace, justice, and a healthy planet. He's one of the founding members of Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace, and back in 2003, he was one of the people that formed the vigil that continues to vigil at the Four Corners in Del Mar after 12 years. We're still there. He was also the person that suggested the name for our organization, Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. And he did that because he thought perhaps other friends and neighbors would join together, and in fact they have. So, could you tell us a little bit about what the formative experiences were for you in becoming an activist?
Yeah, I was born in 1930 in Germany, and was brought up in a secular Jewish household less than 3 years before Hitler came to power. By the time I was 6 in 1936, oppression and serious discrimination against Jews was the law of the land. And my mother took me to an international school, boarding school in the Netherlands, to get away from all of that. This had been founded in 1934 by Quakers who wanted to provide an escape hatch for, especially for Jewish children from Germany. And I would say that the the spirit of that place had a very strong influence on me.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that happened in May of 1940, I was visiting The Hague in Holland because I needed to go to the American consulate in Rotterdam. And I woke up in the middle of the night, at 4 a.m. to be exact, to the sound of planes and bombs falling. Experienced 5 days of bombing. I must say, I can still feel the terror in my gut that I felt that night. So I've become a lifelong opponent of the concept of war.
Mm-hmm.
I was exceedingly fortunate that finally, after 3 years waiting, my mother and my American visa came through, and we were able. This happened in March of 1941, when the Second World War was already a year and a half old. And we left Germany in April of 1941 for Spain, and we were on practically the last steamer that went from Europe to America at that time, and got into the U.S. in May of 1941. By the fall, we were living, my mother and I, in Louisville, Kentucky. And in 45, I had the good fortune, again, a product of the Quakers. The American Friends Service Committee had a work camp for high school age people. And for 8 weeks, we were working on home improvements in a very small 13-family black community outside of Philadelphia. When I came back, I was involved in my first activism. I was part of a group called Youth in Action, and we sat in the mayor's office with a demand to integrate the public parks. And by the next summer, the public parks were integrated. And I also, by that time, in '46, I was a senior in high school, and there was a contest sponsored by the Colonial Dames of America, and I won that contest with an essay about preventing nuclear war and recommending a world government to be able to enforce that. So those were my first two actions.
Okay, well, what are some of the other issues that you've been concerned about in the past? What has driven you to activism?
Well, basically a sense of justice. When I see oppression or injustice, I tend to get very much involved in wanting to fix it. And one of my favorite relatively recent actions was to form the Muslim Solidarity Committee in Albany. It was right after a guilty verdict for Imam Aref and a pizza shop owner, Mohammed Hussein, on trumped-up terrorism charges, a plot that was totally invented by the FBI. And a couple of people called a meeting right after that verdict was announced, and 50 people showed up and formed this group. And the first thing we did was to get a petition asking for leniency in the sentencing, and got 987 signatures. And indeed, even though the prosecutors asked for a 30-year sentence, the judge gave them 15 years, which was 15 years too long. The trial was a sham, but nonetheless, it was somewhat useful. And we had, during the 7 months between the verdict and the sentencing, we had 2 vigils each week in front of the courtroom building. To give you an idea of that trial, they had stationed sharpshooters on the roof of that building, and all kinds of marshal vehicles in front, as if to suggest these are dangerous terrorists. Well, it was totally absurd. It was a plot totally manufactured by the FBI.
Totally set up.
And I would... the beautiful thing was that this group of people has been giving moral support and financial support to the families of the victims of this FBI plot for the last 7 or 8 years. It's yeah, about that long. So these are people who simply, as I do, believe in righting just plain wrongs.
All right. Well, what about some of your other memories of actions that you've been involved in? What are your best memories?
Well, that's a good question. Well, let me tell you one thing that really radicalized me.
Okay.
I was a graduate student at Harvard in physics, and started a family much too early, and I couldn't afford it, and had 2 children. By 1955, in the beginning of my 5th year of graduate school, but I was always working half-time, so it was pretty slow going. My wife was home with the children, and the family was living on the $1,600 a year that I earned as a teaching fellow or research assistant. And the department had a rule that you couldn't have a department job for more than 4 years. So one professor who was looking out for me said he'd found out about a job that should be of real interest to me. It would be interesting and well paid at the Harvard Medical School. So I immediately called, and for the next 3 days, waiting for my appointment with Dr. Fairbanks, was on cloud 9. My fellow students were headed for H-bomb work and stuff that was anathema to me. And here I was going to be working well paid at the medical school, a whole new idea of how to use my physics. Mm-hmm. And in the interview, it turned out that we were studying under a contract with the Army Chemical Corps. We were studying an organism that was harmless, that had exactly the same shape as the anthrax bacillus. And we were studying its survival under different atmospheric, temperature, humidity, and light conditions. In other words, how do you deliver anthrax to an enemy? In the Harvard Medical School. It drove me nuts.
I can imagine.
I mean, the contradiction there. Mm-hmm. I would say contradiction is one of the big drivers when I see that kind of situation.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good example.
That was not an example of something I did. It was an example of something I didn't, but also of something that really drove me.
Yeah.
And my longest sustained piece of activism, about 3 years at 20 hours a week, was with CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, starting right after I finished my PhD, all volunteer work. We were asked to reconstitute a local CORE chapter in Boston, which had been there many years earlier and had gone defunct. Now, it wasn't my big issue at the time. My big issue was prevention of nuclear war. But during the Cold War, that was a hopeless task. Mm-hmm. And I thought I'd learn some tactics by working in the easier field of racial equality. Mm-hmm. And it was a homecoming in a sense. It was, after all, my first...
An important work.
Oh, it was very important work. And it ended up, we were picketing local affiliates of some of the drugstores at which sit-ins were taking place in the South. Woolworths and Cress and various places like that, which had Boston shops. And that really got a lot more people involved. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we've got less than 15 minutes left, so I want to move on here.
Yeah.
But I'd like to spend a whole hour just talking about your past, but I know you're doing a lot of stuff now, so hopefully we can get to that. Back in November 2011, you were arrested with other Occupy Albany participants for refusing to leave Lafayette Park. Was that the first time that you've been arrested for standing up for what you believe in?
Well, actually not.
No.
I was arrested in Washington, D.C. at a protest against the World Economic Forum, or it may have been the IMF. I don't really remember the exact target, but it was a target of transnational capitalism, and I was actually doing nothing. I was simply walking along the street. They did a mass arrest. I'm actually entitled by a judicial decree to say I've never been arrested there.
Okay.
Because we won a lawsuit. The named plaintiffs actually won, I think, $11,000. But the main thing we won was an agreement that the Metropolitan Police not do this kind of causeless mass arresting. But I was there in jail, and I know the jail experience. The arrest in Lafayette Park didn't land me in jail. In fact, it cost the taxpayer some untold amount, because when I was driven from there to the basement of one of the buildings in the Empire State Plaza, I had to show the state police that had been brought in from Westchester County how to get there. And then it took about an hour to be booked and all that stuff. All of this expense incurred by a governor who knew damn well that the district attorney wouldn't prosecute. It was just for show, and I think he showed his colors pretty clearly. No wonder he's called Governor 1%. I will say this for Occupy. Occupy put on the map the discussion, which has become more and more serious since then, about economic inequality in this country. One couldn't talk about that. And all of a sudden, this 1%, 99% made it inescapable what's going on.
That kind of leads to my next question. Do you think these actions that you've participated in have made a difference?
Well, obviously, Occupy has made it possible to discuss this issue. Now, if the Democrats weren't so dependent on Wall Street money for their campaigns, and ran on truly populist issues, I think they would win hands down. Most of them are sold out. I can name about half a dozen, maybe a dozen senator candidates who are for real, but not very many. And I can't name a single Republican that I have any hope for whatsoever.
Okay, well, what are the biggest issues for you right now? What do you think the most important issues are that we should really be most concerned about?
I tell you, my favorite group right now is Jewish Voice for Peace, because the behavior of the state of Israel in its occupation of Palestinian land, in its racism towards Palestinians, towards Bedouins, towards all Arabs, but even, Christian Palestinians, the oppressive occupation of their land, the home destructions, the theft of land, the destruction of olive trees, just really is horrendous. And the ethnic cleansing, and the deliberate ethnic cleansing. There are even people in public life who are talking about extermination. It comes close to being Nazism reinvented. Now, there's a group called the Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations in this country. And their uncritical defense of anything Israel does is such an outrage to the Jewish tradition of justice shall you pursue, that I was beginning to be ashamed of my Jewish heritage. Jewish Voice for Peace counteracts that, makes me proud of my Jewish heritage. And so that's very important to me. And there is a local chapter of that, and I'm happy that that's there.
Okay.
But
we're running out of time here. We have a little more than 5 minutes left, and I still want to talk to you about something that you're involved in every day, and that is the community-supported agriculture, the CSA.
Yes. Thanks for asking.
That you and your daughter.
My daughter and I are running a farm, and the place I have that I got during my first year in Albany, which was 1986, is a wonderful former farm in New Scotland, and so I'm doing that, but I'm also aware that it's a counteraction to agribusiness as it's set up. Agribusiness doesn't care about the food. It doesn't care about the land. It cares about dollars. It doesn't even care about the farmer. It wants to exploit the farmer's labor, and then, but it's destroying the land. And together with NAFTA, it is destroying the food sovereignty in other countries. 2 million Mexican campesinos have been forced off the land, their land grabbed up by rich people, and they're knocking at our doors. And GMOs is a way of trying to get full control of the whole food sector.
So that really ties in with all your other activism.
It sure does, and it in particular it ties in with my environmental activism, because
we didn't talk about climate change, but I know that's an issue.
That's right. Well, I sure enjoyed being on that climate march, and it's another really big issue for me. But small scale organic agriculture is the most productive per acre use of land. It can feed the world if we only get rid of the big agribusiness.
Well, that's hopeful.
Last word.
So we're about down to about 3 or 4 minutes left, and I know that you have a couple of things you'd like to say. So this would be a good time for you.
Yeah, I do. I wrote something out here because it sums it up nicely. My upbringing, as well as my education as a physicist and later as a lawyer, have conspired to make me determined to connect the dots and to realize that all my causes are interconnected. They have a common root, corporate capitalism. All of them are aggravated, and many of them caused by corporate capitalism. But that's not the root cause. The root cause is Nazism. N-O-T-S-E-E-ism. N-O-T-S-E-E. Not seeing. The inability or unwillingness to see the other, to see the earth and all its inhabitants as oneself. The inability to be grateful, joyous, and to love life, oneself, and the other. I'd say that that's as serious a disease as the Nazism that I experienced in my environment, in my birth environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that says a lot, and we really appreciate your being here today, Michael Rice. Thank you so much for doing this interview. You've really covered a lot of ground. And
well, yeah, they really, I mean, I could spend a couple of hours just tracing the interconnections among all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But there it is, and I could also tell you all of the horrors of the agribusiness sector. That's my current main. One thing I wanted to say, I'm not. When something like Ferguson,
right,
comes up, I want to drop everything. But that's not very effective. I can't drop my farm.
Right.
I can't drop.
Keep going.
I can't drop fighting GMOs. I can't drop fighting agribusiness.
Right.
So how do I balance the interconnectedness of all of that with focus on one of the pieces that I'm particularly attached to?
Well, thank you so much for being here today. You're a role model for all of us, and thank you all for joining us, and please join us for future shows.